there, I'm Sandy Allnock, and I'm going to be doing a Bible journaling page from Acts chapter 27, which was one of Paul's journeys by ship, where he had a lot of storms that he encountered. And in chapter 27, I've selected one verse: God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you, even though it's the full chapter, or even more than that, that this journey is covered. My pastor preaches through a book at a time in his teachings at our church, Pastor Steve Shell, and he's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And he goes verse by verse, and it took us quite a long time to get through all of this particular journey on the boat because there was so much to learn. I never knew until I studied under Pastor Steve how much there is to unpack in absolutely every verse, even in something like a journey on a ship. And the thing that I remember from this, even though it was a few years ago that this particular passage was preached, was that God told Paul a bunch of the things that were going to happen after he got off this boat. He was giving him, visions and knowledge of what was coming so that he was sure that they were going to survive. And especially when God told him, I'm going to give you the lives of everyone here. So he just kept praying and hanging on, and he told everybody to make sure you eat before this boat sinks because you're going to need all your strength, and all sorts of things that he was able to guide everyone because he had the trust in the Lord that it was going to work out. It was going to be fine. And for me, it was a real lesson in understanding that even though the world throws stuff at us, we end up with all kinds of crazy things going on in our lives, and we feel like we've been blown off course and we're no longer following where God wants us to go, that he's able to use that. He's able to find a way to push us onto our correct course, even if the circumstances of life appear to have sent us off in different directions. So that is kind of where I'm going with this whole page. And I just envisioned a really dark and stormy page with a boat kind of in the mist of the water and lots of splashing and everything. So that's where I'm headed here. And you can see I scribbled the color on. And the Museum Aquarelle pencils from Caran d'Ache are one of the most highly pigmented ones. And especially if you do them in a couple of layers. I'm using a baby wipe to move the color around. You can sort of see the color comes off on the baby wipe, which means it lifts some of that color. And that will lighten it ever so slightly, even though it seems to be intensifying it because it's moving it around. But then you can put another layer on top and on top and on top. And with watercolor pencil, as long as you don't get really thick and dark, you can still read the words through it. I'm also not using any page prep. And I never use any page prep on any of my stuff. I use mediums that are going to just work by themselves. And then periodically I'll iron it if the paper starts getting too wrinkly. Sometimes it doesn't need that. Depends on how much moisture I'm putting on with my baby wipe. So now I'm adding another layer of the watercolor pencil onto my picture here and just kind of scribbling it on. Again, I'm going to move the color in the same fashion. I'm just trying to add a little bit more definition to the image as I go along. But as I was, in the years in between since I had heard these sermons, I've thought about this so many times because there are a number of times when I've thought my life had kind of gone off course and wondered if God was going to be able to, get me back on track. Because there were things that I thought he was going to do. I thought I was, someday going to be an artist full time, somehow that was going to happen, and that I was going to be able to share that with people somehow to glorify him. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I seemed to have been stuck in a career. I was working as a graphic designer, and it seemed like I was never going to make it anywhere outside of that. I didn't seem to have the time to pursue outside of a day job the kinds of things that I wanted to do. And I also didn't really seem to be making it anywhere in that day job. I was in one position for 12 years without any promotions whatsoever. And it bothered me a lot for quite some time. And I just felt like maybe I'd missed what God had told me to do. And I was trying to run a nonprofit along the way And so I did that for a number of years, but I just felt like there was more out there, and there was going to be some way that God could use my art in bigger and different ways. And yet it just didn't seem to happen. And then all of a sudden it did. It took quite a long time. Like I said, I was 12 years in that one position, but he finally made it possible for me to leave that whole job and start doing other things and start cobbling together a living as an artist. And I got to focus more on my blog, focus more on my YouTube channel, and now start this YouTube channel, this second one. If you are just finding this one and you want more coloring tutorials, I have another channel. So you can just look for Sandy Allnock on YouTube and find me. And I'll also, of course, have a link in the doobly-doo down below. Doobly-doo being the description area down below. It's a internet term that I heard years ago, and it was just so cute. I've adopted it. Now, this is another layer of color. I've used a lot of stormy colors in the sky, a lot of green, brown, and gray, and a little bit of blue, and then a couple different blues in the water. And I'm just pushing the color, and in some cases, I'm just tapping. I'm not necessarily pushing or wiping, because then you'd end up wiping all the color off. But in order to remain on there, you can just tap a little bit, so you're moving the color ever so slightly, but you're not lifting as much off. And so you're able to retain a little bit more of the color on the page. And just kind of working my way around. I was trying to figure out how far up my wave was going to splash on my page. And I also did have plans to add some more white to it as well, which I'll do later. But I wanted to reserve some of the white of the page in addition to that. Now, even though it is, you know, there's some areas that are getting dark there, I can still go back in and lift off more color. So if I end up with a little spot that ends up being too dark, the baby wipe can lift off quite a bit of that color at pretty much any point. And I'm going to add some sharper detail in just a few spots. I don't want to add too much detail right where the words are, because that's going to make it a little more difficult to read the words. So I want that detail to be really soft and vague, just enough to seem like it's a boat and to give me just the shape of the sail. So I get the sail and the mast of the boat with just a lot of water cascading and crashing over top. The Museum Aquarelle white pencil is one of the few that actually seems to work as a watercolor pencil. And I'm not even going to move a lot of that watercolor pencil with my baby wipe, but I can add a lot of little highlights here and there with this pencil, and it'll be really soft in order to brighten up some of those areas. I tried to add a little bit around where that rudder might be to make sure it communicates as a boat. And then I wanted to add some sharper details in a few different areas, and I'm using a white gel pen to do that. Just adding a few really light lines for the mast and everything, because there's a lot of lines on a boat. I have no idea what these boats looked like back in the day, but I'm trying to make a billowing sail and then hope that it looks like an ancient boat. And I did a little bit with watercolor pencil as well. To add a little bit more white detail on my water, I'm doing some stippling and kind of scribbling with the pen, but then rubbing it with my finger a little bit just so it softens the color and doesn't end up being super sharp everywhere, because that would look a little garish, but it kind of blends in that way a little bit. And then I took a watercolor pencil to basically sketch in what my words are going to be and where they're going to be at, and then I can trace them using a micron pen and at least have my spacing down where I want it, that sort of thing. And then I'm tapping with my baby wipe to just lift off and blend in a little bit of that color here and there. And decided that I wanted to add another word onto this, since it's kind of written as a prayer. Use my storms to guide me. And I'm going to add the word Lord down here below. But I also wanted the Lord to look like it's kind of falling into some of that mist, and the whole sentiment, the whole the words on here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that white pen on top to make it look like the words are splashing up over on top of the words that I've written. And I can add more journaling down below to personalize the page and tell myself the story so I never forget what God taught me about this verse. And I will add that later on and keep it private from YouTube. So thank you so much for joining me. There's more videos here if you'd like to watch them. There's also a Bible journaling class, and you could also click on my face to subscribe to this channel. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you.